The cavern fell silent after the Silverian was contained, its once overwhelming energy now subdued within the ancient machine. Jack sat slumped against a rock, his body aching from the fight, his mind still reeling from the artifact's lingering influence. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she examined the cuts and bruises he'd sustained while defending her. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, her voice breaking slightly. "You could have left me." Jack managed a weak grin despite the pain. "And let you handle all this alone? Not a chance." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For weeks, they had danced around their growing bond, pretending it was just duty or necessity. But moments like this stripped away the pretense. They weren't just partners in survival anymore. They were something more. And yet, neither of them dared to say it aloud. Cal's mercenaries had retreated after the explosion, likely fearing the worst. Still, the danger wasn't over. The artifact's containment was temporary at best, and Cal wouldn't stop until he claimed it for himself. As they made their way back to the palace through hidden tunnels, Lyra confided her fears to Jack. "The machine won't hold forever," she admitted. "It's old, unstable. If we don't find a permanent solution soon, the Silverian will break free, and then no one will be safe." Jack frowned, leaning heavily on her shoulder as they climbed out of the tunnels. "So what's the plan?" Lyra hesitated, glancing at him. "There's one option, but it's risky. The artifact can only be fully neutralized by someone who understands its power intimately, someone willing to sacrifice themselves to shut it down permanently." Jack stopped dead in his tracks. "Wait, you're not suggesting." "I have to try," Lyra interrupted firmly. "It's my responsibility. My ancestors created this thing. It's up to me to fix it." "No," Jack shot back, his voice rising. "You're not doing this alone. I didn't come this far just to watch you throw your life away." Lyra stared at him, surprise flickering across her face. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. A small, sad smile. "You really cared, don't you?" "Of course I do," Jack exclaimed, frustration bubbling over. "You think I stuck around because of some paycheck? Because it's fun dodging blasters and fighting off lunatics? No. I stayed because..." He trailed off, unsure how to finish. "Because," Lyra prompted gently. "Because you matter," Jack finished quietly. "To me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of his confession settled between them, fragile and undeniable. Finally, Lyra reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Then help me end this, for both our sakes." Back at the palace, chaos reigned. News of the attack had spread, and factions loyal to Kale seized the opportunity to escalate their rebellion. Fires burned in the streets, and protests erupted outside the gates. With time running out, Jack devised a desperate plan. Overload the machine containing the Silverian, destabilizing it enough to destroy the artifact completely, but at great personal risk. "I'll stay behind to trigger the sequence," Jack insisted when Lyra protested. "You need to rally your people. Prove you're strong enough to lead without relying on ancient relics." Tears glistened in Lyra's eyes as she realized he meant every word. "If you die..." "I won't," Jack promised, though even he wasn't sure if it was true. "But if I do, tell everyone I went out saving the galaxy." Sounds heroic, right? As Lyra fled the collapsing chamber, leaving Jack to face the final moments alone, she vowed silently that his sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. Whatever happened next, she would honor his courage and ensure their story became legend. Jack Calloway wiped grease-stained hands on his coveralls, glancing up at the neon sign flickering above his repair shop. Calloway's Fixes, it read in bold letters, though most days he wondered if anyone even noticed. Life on New Terra wasn't glamorous, just a string of broken-down starships and customers who haggled over every credit. But Jack had learned to survive. Barely. That afternoon, as he worked on a stubborn engine part, the door slid open with a hiss. He looked up, expecting another impatient pilot or cargo hauler. Instead, 3 figures entered, their presence immediately commanding attention. They weren't human, not entirely. Their elongated limbs shimmered faintly under the dim light, and their eyes glowed like liquid gold. "Jack Calloway," one of them asked in a smooth, melodic voice that sent shivers down his spine. It wasn't threatening, but there was something unnerving about how perfectly calm they sounded. "That's me," Jack replied, straightening up. He shoved his hands into his pockets, trying to appear nonchalant despite the sudden knot forming in his stomach. "What can I do for you?" The tallest figure stepped forward, holding out a small device that projected an image of an alien city, a sprawling metropolis made of crystalline towers reaching toward the sky. "We represent the Xyrillian Empire," the figure said, "and we require your services." "My services," Jack echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Look, I fix engines, not whatever this is." He gestured vaguely at the hologram. "This is Xerix Prime," the alien continued, ignoring his skepticism. "Our crown princess, Lyra Velara, finds herself in need of assistance, specifically someone willing to act as her temporary husband." Jack stared blankly for a moment before bursting into laughter. "You're joking, right? Me? A husband? For some alien princess? What kind of scam is this?" The alien didn't flinch. "It is no joke, Mr. Calloway. Your species' reputation for adaptability makes you uniquely suited for this role. Additionally," the figure paused, pulling up another projection, a tally of credits so large it made Jack's head spin. "We are prepared to compensate you generously." Jack's laughter died instantly. His mind raced. That much money could solve all his problems. The debt collectors breathing down his neck, the repairs needed for his shop, maybe even enough to leave this godforsaken rock behind. Still, something felt off. Why would aliens pay him, an ordinary mechanic, to play pretend? "What's the catch?" he asked suspiciously. "There will be scrutiny," the alien admitted. "Questions about your suitability. You must learn our customs, maintain appearances, and avoid drawing suspicion. However, your duties are limited to public engagements. Once the situation stabilizes, you may return to your life." Jack hesitated, weighing the risks. It sounded insane, but desperation clouded his judgment. Besides, what did he have to lose? If things went south, he'd find a way out. And if they didn't, well, a new start sounded pretty appealing. "All right," he finally said, exhaling sharply. "I'm in." Within hours, Jack found himself aboard a sleek starship, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. As the ship surged forward, leaving New Terra far behind, doubt crept in. Who was this princess? What exactly had he signed up for? One thing was certain. Life as he knew it was about to change forever. The tension in the palace reached a breaking point when an encrypted message intercepted by Lyra's spies revealed something shocking. Lord Kael Drexen wasn't just stirring dissent among the nobles. He was actively plotting to seize control. Worse still, he wasn't working alone. A faction within the court had uncovered ancient legends about a powerful artifact hidden beneath Xerix Prime. One said to grant unimaginable energy and influence to whoever possessed it. The whispers claimed it could shift the balance of power across the galaxy. Lyra called Jack to her private chambers late one night, her expression grim as she handed him a data tablet displaying fragments of the intercepted message. "They're searching for the Silverian," she explained. "An artifact buried deep below the surface. According to legend, it's both a gift and a curse." Jack scanned the text, his brow furrowing. "Why tell me this now?" "Because if they find it first, everything falls apart," Lyra replied sharply. "And I need your help to stop them." Jack hesitated. He hadn't signed up for treasure hunts or ancient prophecies. He'd agreed to play pretend husband, not become some intergalactic hero. But looking at Lyra's determined face, he knew there was no backing out. Not anymore. The next morning, they set off under the guise of inspecting remote mining operations, a cover story designed to throw off suspicion. Their destination was a series of caverns etched into the planet's crust, long abandoned due to unstable terrain. As their hovercraft descended into the shadowy depths, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into danger. Inside the caverns, the air grew colder, and the walls shimmered faintly with veins of glowing minerals. Lyra led the way, consulting a map projected from her wrist device. According to historical records, the Silverian is housed in a chamber protected by traps and puzzles, she said. We'll have to be careful. Careful turned out to be an understatement. The path twisted through narrow passages and over precarious bridges spanning bottomless chasms. At one point, they triggered a trap, a cascade of razor-sharp crystals shooting down from the ceiling. Jack barely managed to pull Lyra out of harm's way, his heart pounding as they crouched behind a rock. "You okay?" he asked, glancing at her. She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Let's keep moving." Finally, after hours of navigating hazards, they reached the central chamber. In the middle stood a pedestal, atop which rested the Silverian, a pulsating orb of swirling light, radiating warmth and an almost hypnotic hum. Jack approached cautiously, mesmerized by its beauty. But when he touched it, a surge of energy coursed through him, flooding his mind with flashes of memories. His failures, regrets, fears, and overwhelming emotions he'd buried long ago. Lyra grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Don't touch it again," she warned, her voice tinged with urgency. "It amplifies what's inside you. That's why it's dangerous." Jack staggered backward, shaken but alive. "What do we do now?" "We take it," Lyra said firmly, wrapping the orb in a containment field. "If Kale gets his hands on this, it won't just destroy my reign. It'll tear apart the entire empire." As they left the chamber, Jack realized their mission had changed. This wasn't just about saving Lyra anymore. It was about stopping a catastrophe, one that neither of them fully understood yet. The starship descended through clouds of shimmering silver mist, revealing Xyrix Prime in all its alien splendor. Jack pressed his face against the viewport, awestruck by the sight below. Towering crystalline spires stretched toward the heavens, their surfaces refracting light into dazzling rainbows. Rivers of liquid sapphire wound through lush green valleys, and hovering vehicles zipped between buildings like fireflies. It was beautiful, but intimidating. As the ship touched down on a landing platform outside the palace, Jack felt a wave of unease settle over him. Two guards in ornate armor approached, their expressions unreadable behind their visors. They escorted him inside without saying a word, leaving Jack to trail awkwardly behind them. The air smelled faintly metallic, and every step echoed ominously against polished floors that seemed to glow from within. Finally, they led him to an enormous chamber where Princess Lyra Velara awaited. She stood at the far end of the room, her slender frame draped in flowing robes that shimmered like moonlight. Her skin had a soft lavender hue, and her eyes, large and luminous, fixed on Jack with an intensity that made him squirm. "So," she said coolly, her voice carrying just enough disdain to make it clear she wasn't thrilled about this arrangement either. "This is him." Jack bristled slightly but forced himself to nod. "Jack Calloway, Your Highness." "At your service." He gave a clumsy bow, unsure if that was even the right thing to do. Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Charming," she muttered dryly before turning to one of her advisors. "We'll begin training immediately." Training turned out to be a whirlwind of lessons on Xyrillian customs, history, and etiquette. Jack struggled to keep up as tutors bombarded him with information about everything from proper table manners to how to address nobles during formal events. Every mistake earned him a sharp glance or a sigh from Lyra, who watched his progress with thinly veiled frustration. "You're not taking this seriously," she snapped after he accidentally addressed her as Lila instead of Lyra. "I'm trying," Jack shot back, throwing his hands up. "But you didn't exactly warn me I'd need a degree in alien culture." Her lips tightened, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. For the first time since meeting her, Jack realized she wasn't completely emotionless, just guarded. Maybe they weren't so different after all. Things grew more complicated when Jack noticed the tension among the courtiers. Many openly sneered at him, whispering insults about his human origins. Others were overly friendly, pressing him for details about his relationship with Lyra. One noble in particular caught his attention. Lord Caldrexen, a tall, imposing figure with piercing blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. Cale lingered near Jack often, asking probing questions and offering vague warnings. "Be careful, Mr. Calloway," Cale said one evening during dinner. "Not everyone here believes you're worthy of standing beside our princess." Jack forced a grin, though his stomach churned. "Thanks for the advice." Later, he confided in Lyra about Cal's behavior. To his surprise, she didn't dismiss his concerns. Instead, she admitted there were factions within the court plotting against her, and now, by extension, him. "This charade isn't just about appearances," she said quietly. "It's about survival. Yours and mine." For the first time, Jack understood the gravity of what he'd signed up for. This wasn't just a job. It was a dangerous game. And somehow, he'd become a key player. The days blurred together as Jack tried to adjust to palace life, but the weight of his role grew heavier with each passing moment. Lyra's advisors scrutinized his every move, their glowing eyes tracking him like hawks waiting for prey. The nobles whispered behind silk fans and ornate goblets, their disdain thinly veiled beneath polished smiles. Even the servants seemed wary of him, bowing too deeply or avoiding eye contact altogether. Jack felt like an outsider in a world that didn't want him, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending otherwise. Things came to a head during a grand banquet held in honor of their union. The hall sparkled with light refracting off crystal chandeliers, and soft music floated through the air, blending with the hum of conversation. Jack stood awkwardly beside Lyra, wearing robes far fancier than anything he'd ever owned. They fit well enough, but he still felt out of place, like a mismatched puzzle piece shoved into the wrong picture. "Relax," Lyra murmured under her breath as they greeted guests. "Smile. Pretend you belong here." "Easier said than done," Jack muttered back, forcing a grin as another noble approached. This one was Lord Caldrexen, who swept into a low bow before addressing them. "Your Highness, Mr. Calloway," Cale said smoothly, his voice dripping with charm. "May I say how inspiring it is to see such unity between our peoples." Jack resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Inspiring? Hardly. More like ridiculous. But he nodded politely, playing along. "Thank you, my lord." Cale lingered, his sharp gaze flickering between Jack and Lyra. Still, some wonder if this arrangement is truly wise. After all, humans are so unpredictable. Lyra stiffened slightly, her smile never wavering. "I assure you, Lord Cale, Jack has proven himself more than capable." "Of course," Cale replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. He gave a final bow and walked away, leaving Jack fuming. What was that about? Jack asked once Cale was out of earshot. "He's testing us," Lyra said quietly. "Trying to find cracks in our story. Don't let him get to you." But Cale wasn't the only problem. As the night wore on, Jack noticed other nobles exchanging knowing glances or slipping away to private corners to talk in hushed tones. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and it made his skin crawl. Later, when the banquet ended and they retreated to Lyra's chambers, she finally opened up. Sitting across from him at a small table, she poured 2 glasses of shimmering blue liquid. "You should know the truth," she began, her voice low. "This isn't just about silencing rumors. There are factions within the court, powerful ones, that want me removed. Some believe I'm unfit to rule because of my age, others because of my views on reform. And now," she hesitated, "now they see you as a weakness." Jack frowned. "Why not pick someone from your own people instead of dragging me into this mess?" "Because no Xyrillian would agree to this," she admitted. They'd demand power, influence, all things I can't afford to give right now. You're safe because you have nothing to gain. At least, that's what I thought. Her words hung heavy in the air. Jack realized then that Lyra wasn't just using him. She was depending on him. For the first time, he saw a vulnerability in her eyes, a hint of fear she couldn't fully hide. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We survive," she said firmly. "Together." For the first time since arriving, Jack felt a flicker of resolve. Whatever was coming, he wouldn't face it alone. The palace trembled as the containment chamber destabilized, its core glowing brighter with each passing second. Jack worked frantically, his hands moving over the control panel even as alarms blared and sparks flew around him. Sweat dripped down his face, and his heart pounded in his chest, not just from fear, but from the enormity of what he was about to do. For so long, he'd seen himself as a failure, someone who ran when things got tough. But now, standing here, ready to sacrifice everything, he felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, pressing buttons and rerouting energy flows. The machine groaned ominously, its structure beginning to crack under the strain. He glanced toward the exit one last time, half expecting Lyra to burst back in and drag him out. But she didn't, and he knew why. She trusted him. She believed in him. With a final keystroke, the sequence activated. A countdown appeared on the screen, 10 seconds. Jack stepped back, bracing himself against the wall as the chamber filled with an intense, blinding light. The Silverian pulsed wildly, its energy spiraling out of control before collapsing inward with a deafening roar. Then, silence. When the dust settled, Jack found himself lying on the floor, miraculously alive. His ears rang, and every inch of his body ached, but he was breathing. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived. Above ground, Lyra stood amidst the ruins of the palace courtyard. Her people gathered around her. Fires still smoldered in the distance, but for the first time in weeks, there was hope in their eyes. When Jack staggered into view, covered in soot and grinning like an idiot, a cheer erupted from the crowd. Lyra ran to him, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. "You're insane," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Do you know that?" Jack chuckled weakly. "Yeah. Well, turns out I'm also hard to kill." Lyra pulled back just enough to look at him, her expression softening. "You saved us all." "Nah," Jack replied, shaking his head. "We did it together. Always was a team effort." In the days that followed, life on Xerix Prime began to heal. Cal's rebellion crumbled without the promise of the Silverian's power, and Lyra emerged stronger than ever, proving herself not just as a ruler, but as a leader capable of uniting her fractured empire. As for Jack, he became a symbol of bravery, a human who had risked everything for a world not his own. One evening, as they stood together on a balcony overlooking the glittering city, Lyra turned to him with a question in her eyes. "What will you do now?" she asked. "You've earned your freedom, Jack. You could go anywhere." Jack hesitated, looking out at the stars. For so long, he'd dreamed of escaping his past, of finding a fresh start somewhere far away. But now, staring at Lyra, he realized he already had what he'd been searching for, a place where he belonged. "I think I'll stick around," he said finally, smiling. "If you'll have me." Lyra's lips curved into a smile, and she took his hand. Always. Months later, their bond became official, not as part of some political scheme, but as a genuine partnership forged through shared struggles and sacrifices. News of their union spread across the galaxy, inspiring tales of love transcending species, titles, and borders. Together, Jack and Lyra proved that sometimes the most unlikely connections lead to the brightest futures. And as they stood side by side, watching the stars twinkle above Xerix Prime, they knew their story wasn't just about survival. It was about hope, unity, and the kind of love that defied the odds. Returning to the palace with the Silverian felt like carrying a live star in their hands. The artifact pulsed faintly within its containment field, casting an eerie glow over everything it touched. Jack and Lyra exchanged wary glances as they stepped off their transport craft, both acutely aware that the orb's energy was already affecting those around them. Servants moved with unusual haste, nobles whispered more fervently than before, and even the air seemed charged with tension. Lyra wasted no time locking the Silverian away in a secure vault deep beneath the palace. "We can't let anyone near it," she told Jack firmly. "Not until we figure out how to neutralize its influence." But keeping the artifact hidden proved harder than expected. Its presence radiated beyond the walls of the vault, amplifying emotions across the palace. Advisors who were once calm became irritable, guards snapped at each other, and dissent among the court grew louder. Lord Kale seized the opportunity, rallying his allies to accuse Lyra of hoarding dangerous power for herself. "She's unstable," Kale declared during a heated council meeting, his voice ringing through the chamber. "The princess plays with forces she doesn't understand, risking our very survival." Jack clenched his fists, standing silently beside Lyra as murmurs of agreement spread through the room. She remained composed, though her knuckles whitened where she gripped the edge of the table. "If you're so concerned, Lord Kale," she said coolly, "why don't you explain why your men have been spotted near the caverns?" Cal's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Rumors, Your Highness, nothing more." After the meeting, Lyra turned to Jack, her mask of confidence slipping. "He knows about the Silverian," she admitted quietly, "and he won't stop until he has it." Things escalated rapidly after that. One night, alarms blared throughout the palace as mercenaries loyal to Kale launched a surprise attack. Chaos erupted. Guards scrambled to defend the corridors, blaster fire echoed through the halls, and smoke filled the air. Lyra grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him toward the vault. "We need to move the artifact somewhere safer," she shouted over the noise. They fought their way through the chaos, dodging blasts and debris. When they finally reached the vault, they found it breached, the containment field shattered, the Silverian glowing ominously on the floor. Before they could act, Kale appeared, flanked by armed soldiers. "Hand it over, Princess," Kale demanded, his tone icy. "You've caused enough trouble." Lyra stepped forward defiantly, shielding the orb with her body. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I'll take my chances," Kale sneered, raising his weapon. In a split second, Jack made a decision. He lunged at Kale, tackling him to the ground while Lyra snatched up the Silverian. Blaster shots ricocheted around them as they fled deeper into the palace, pursued relentlessly by Cal's forces. At one point, Jack shoved Lyra into a hidden passageway. "Go," he urged. "I'll hold them off." "No," Lyra protested, gripping his arm tightly. "We do this together, or not at all." Reluctantly, Jack followed her into the shadows, the weight of the artifact pressing heavily between them. As they escaped into the labyrinthine tunnels beneath the palace, Jack realized something crucial. Their bond had shifted. They weren't just allies anymore. They were partners, fighting side by side against impossible odds. And somehow, despite the danger looming ahead, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The tunnels beneath the palace were dark and suffocating, their narrow passages illuminated only by the faint glow of the Silverian. Jack and Lyra moved quickly, their footsteps echoing against damp stone walls as they tried to put distance between themselves and Cal's forces. But even in the shadows, the artifact's influence loomed large. Its pulsating light seemed to grow brighter with every step, filling the air with an unsettling hum that resonated deep within their chests. Jack glanced at Lyra, her face pale but determined as she clutched the containment field tighter. "We can't keep running forever," he said, his voice low. "Sooner or later, we'll have to deal with this thing." Lyra nodded grimly. "I know, but destroying it outright might be impossible. It's tied to our planet's history, its energy woven into the fabric of Xerix Prime itself. We need another solution." As they reached a small chamber carved into the rock, They paused to catch their breath. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the constant thrum of the Silverian. Jack leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Immediately, flashes of his past flooded his mind. His father yelling after losing the family business, his younger sister crying as they packed up their home, the crushing weight of failure that had driven him to New Terra. He snapped his eyes open, gasping. "What is it?" Lyra asked sharply, noticing his distress. "That thing. It's messing with my head," Jack admitted, rubbing his temples. "It's like it's digging up everything I've been trying to forget." "It does that," Lyra said quietly. "Amplifies emotions, memories, desires. That's why it's so dangerous. If left unchecked, it could tear anyone apart, including us." Her words sent a chill down Jack's spine. They couldn't let Cale get his hands on the Silverian, but keeping it any longer risked turning them into something unrecognizable. Yet abandoning it wasn't an option either, not when its power threatened to destabilize the entire empire. Suddenly, the sound of boots echoed through the tunnel behind them. Cale's mercenaries were closing in. Lyra grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him toward a narrow crevice leading deeper underground. "This way," she urged. They emerged into a vast cavern filled with jagged stalactites and pools of glowing liquid. In the center stood an ancient machine, a relic from Xerix Prime's forgotten age, covered in intricate carvings that pulsed faintly in sync with the Silverian. Lyra approached it cautiously, studying the symbols etched into its surface. "This must be part of the original mechanism used to contain the artifact," she murmured. "If we can reactivate it." "Can you do it?" Jack asked. "I think so," she replied, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "But I'll need time and cover." Jack understood what she meant. As Cal's men poured into the cavern, weapons drawn, he stepped forward, positioning himself between them and Lyra. "Go," he said firmly. "I'll hold them off." "No," Lyra protested, grabbing his arm. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Jack interrupted, meeting her gaze. "This isn't just your fight anymore. It's ours." With a reluctant nod, Lyra turned back to the machine, her fingers flying over the controls as she worked to bring it online. Meanwhile, Jack faced the advancing mercenaries, using debris and makeshift tools to fend them off. Each blast of energy pushed him closer to exhaustion, but he refused to give ground. Finally, the machine roared to life, its core lighting up in sync with the Silverian. Lyra placed the artifact inside, and the cavern shook violently as the two energies merged. A blinding flash engulfed the room, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the Silverian lay dormant, its malevolent hum replaced by a soft, steady glow. Jack collapsed to his knees, battered but alive, as Lyra rushed to his side. For now, the immediate threat was neutralized, but the cost of their victory lingered in the air, a reminder of how fragile their alliance truly was.